In 1964, an American writer called Robert Arthur published the first book in his series, Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. And in 2025, the German version of that series, Die drei Fragezeichen, ranks in with over 220 books and subsequent audio play adaptations, as well as additional media, and has a fan base of around about 900,000, possibly more. At least that is the average amount of listeners that they have every month. So how the hell did that actually happen, though? How did this American-originated series become so massively successful in Germany, whereas in the US, most people haven't heard of it before? Hi, I'm Puffin. I am a culture anthropologist with a primary focus on media and representation, and I'm also a massive Three Investigators fan. This is not even all of the books I have. This is just the ones I have. That's not even all the ones I have in my flat right now. There's still at least one other that is here. Point is, I'm a massive fan of this, but I am also a researcher, and whilst this is not usually something I talk about on my channel as much, I have a massive interest, both as a person and as a scientist, in media landscape and how media develops. So this originally was gonna be a plain video essay where you were not gonna see me at all. I have most of my script that I wrote for the original version on my phone. I might bumble a little bit because I'm trying to do this a bit more free-spoken. But yeah, let's dive into how an American series became a German cultural phenomenon. So first things first. Like I said in the beginning, the originator of the series, the first person to ever write for the series, is Robert Arthur. For you to understand the point I'm trying to make with this video, it is very important for you to know one thing. Robert Arthur created the series, but even out of the original series, the original American series, which is technically 2 series, he only wrote 10 out of a total of 43 books. So he's by no means the only American writer for this. He's not even the most well-known. I think the general consensus is that the most beloved cases are the M.V. Carey ones, and I think she's written for the series the longest out of all of the American writers, if I remember correctly. So this is an information that I need you to keep in your mind. Just keep that in the back of your brain as you watch the rest of this video. He originated the series, he created it, but he is not the only nor the most well-known writer in the series, in the American series. We're not even touching on the German one yet. So the American series, like I said, started in the 60s and it ended in the 90s. Whereas the German one, obviously, it's still ongoing. There are books coming out every single year, and there is audio play or Hörspiel adaptations. I'm gonna get into what Hörspiel is later, of them as well, every year at least. 3 to 5, I think, is the average. And the most recent one literally came out like a few days ago. As of me recording this video, it's gonna be later when I actually upload this. But yeah, as I'm recording this, the most recent cases that came out as audiobooks are The Three Investigators and the Three-Headed Jackal, The Three Investigators and the City of Gold, and The Three Investigators and the Night of Storms, or the Night of Lightning. I'm not quite sure how they would translate it. So those are the most recent audio plays. They're not the most recent books though. There's way more recent books. So what the hell is the plot of this series? Because so far I've not told you anything. So The Three Investigators is a series about 3 kids from Southern California, from the fictional town Rocky Beach, which is loosely inspired by Topanga Beach. And they're investigators, they're kid detectives, sort of in the likes of Nancy Drew, if you want a vibe. The characters are called Pete Crenshaw, Jupiter Jones, and Bob Andrews. This is so weird for me to say the American names, because in Germany they are known as Justus Jonas instead of Jupiter Jones, Peter Shaw, and Bob Andrews remains Bob Andrews. He gets to keep his name. But anyway, so these 3 kids have their HQ in a abandoned trailer on the salvage yard that is owned by Jupiter's family, and they solve cases. And the cases a lot of them have a sort of supernatural touch, so a lot of ghost phenomena, poltergeist, that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of cases where they investigate like stolen artwork. They have canonical antagonist that is a like internationally wanted art thief. There's a lot of fun stuff there. Characters are supposed to be like anywhere between 12 and maybe 14 in the original few books, and then in the Crime Busters era there was this attempt by Random House, who are the American publisher, to make it a bit more interesting because the series was really losing readers. So they aged them up to 16, so you know that they could drive cars, they could start going out with girls, start solving the kind of more adult cases where like subjects like drugs would come up, subjects like doping. I think one of the Crime Buster cases involves like illegal additives in food and fast food, like that sort of vibe. The Crime Busters era didn't really succeed in garnering as many readers as the publisher would have hoped, and they stopped releasing more books in 1990. In Germany, however, obviously this looks way different. So in Germany, this series gained the amount of traction that it has because of something called Hörspiel. Hörspiel is almost like an audio drama, but not quite. I would make a distinct differentiation between Hörspiel and an audio drama because of the way it is done. Hörspiel is something I have only found in German language and Germany produced media landscapes. It's usually described as a film or a movie for the ears, so kind of you can close your eyes and you can experience it like a movie, unless you have aphantasia, I guess. The Hörspiel works with way less music and way more Foley and audio, like audioscaping, in comparison to at least the like audio dramas from non-German productions that I have heard, and I've heard a few. Most recently, like the ones I've heard were the Audible, like X-Files ones, I think. So the difference is that Hörspiel is, I think it's not viewed as a different version of an audio book. It is its own media. There is publishers that are just produce Hörspiel. And Hörspiel is also kind of considered a medium that you can listen to for any age range. It is appropriate for children as well as for adults. Obviously, like not all of the Hörspiel, but Hörspiel as in general. There's a few like pedagogues and people who work in logopedics that very much argue that Hörspiel is something that is going to be beneficial to a young child's development of speech, fantasy, imagination. I don't know why I'm trying to wing this. I have pulled out quotes from professionals. There's the Medienkindergarten Vienna, so the media kindergarten, and they say about Hörspiel or audio plays that they are especially useful as a children's media source. Listening to them both furthers listening comprehension and language development, media understanding and literacy, creativity and imagination, and it might even help children develop more empathetic tendencies because they have to try and step into the shoes of the characters they're listening to. This stance is also supported by Sprachgold, which translates to speech gold, spoken gold, sort of, which is a network for children's speech development and logopedics. And they state that unlike visual media, like TV shows and movies, Hörspiel encourages children to pay closer attention to the media they're consuming. This encourages them to let their imagination fill in the blanks, and as they focus more on what is being said than they might with TV media, they will automatically learn more words and concepts. And Hörspiel is like crazy accessible. Like I said, there are companies that only produce Hörspiel. There are Hörspiel series. A lot of the Hörspiel series that are like popular have existed for years. There is, I know one that I listened to as a kid is Ilia Eluanda, which is about a girl in a wheelchair and her best friend, and a lot of magical stuff happens as well. Their very popular ones are Benjamin Blümchen and Bibi Blocksberg. One is about a child witch, one is about an elephant, talking elephant. So this is crazy accessible. Those are children's media, but also there's like very high-end adult Hörspiel as well. So it is a media that is accessible in all of Germany for all age ranges, to the point that there's like this whole thing where children might ask to stay up and watch TV with their parents, and then a very common compromise is you can't watch TV, but before you go to bed you're allowed to listen to a Hörspiel. So that's a whole thing. There's one person in Germany that is often referred to as the Queen of Hörspiel, Heike-Dine Körting. She is producing and has been since I think the 60s. She's producing some of the most well-known audio play series in all of Germany. She has this amazing approach to making them really, really detailed without any visual component. She has this massive library of sounds that she recorded all herself, that she keeps in tapes. She still records on tape, I think. She's got this whole thing set up. She's the Queen of Hörspiel, die Königin vom Hörspiel. And in 1979, she started her newest series at the time, which is Die drei Fragezeichen, aka The Three Investigators. So she produced, I think, 6 episodes at first, and then rapidly continued to produce more and more every year. One of the first things she did was she found her 3 investigators. And she did this by looking for young voice actors that had some amount of experience already working for radio stations and stuff, but she handpicked these. And this is true for all of her production. She handpicks who she has voice characters in her Hörspiele. And the 3 kids at the time, I think they were around 14, 15, that she picked to play her 3 investigators were Jens Wawrczyk, Andreas Fröhlich, and Oliver Rohrbeck. So these Hörspiel series of the 3 investigators became massively popular, one of the most popular ones at the time. They sold out like nothing. And then at some point, though, they got that issue. They got to this point where there were no more books to adapt. And the German market still wanted more 3 investigators, and there just wasn't any demand for it in the US. And that's when Random House stopped producing more books. So what happened then is that Kosmos, which is a German publisher, they essentially, after a lot of back and forth about copyright, they obtained the rights to continue writing 3 investigator stories. Yes, exactly. And in 1993, I just had to check the date because I have dyscalculia. I cannot remember numbers to save my arse. The first original German 3 investigators came out, which was Tatort Circus, which means Scene of the Crime Circus. And since then, a list of German writers have been writing for the 3 investigators. So we're continuing this tradition of the book series being handled by not one writer, but many that we'd also seen already in the US. I think we're always looking at anywhere between 5 and 10 writers at the same time that are writing. And then sometimes people retire. So most recently, I think André Marx has recently stopped writing for them and published his last one, which is very sad because he's I think one of the most beloved writers where the fandom can kind of agree on that they all like his books. So obviously nowadays audio media is coming out on Spotify and Apple Music and what have you, and it's still being produced on CDs, but one thing that's special about the 3 Investigators, it also is still being produced on cassette tape. So 3 Investigators is being published via Europa, which belongs to Sony. And it was bought up by Sony, and Europa used to produce cassette tapes like no other, and they're still producing cassette tapes for the 3 investigators because a lot of the people that started listening to the series listened to it when there were only cassette tapes and like to still buy them for the nostalgia factor. So people are still buying cassette tapes, so this series is kind of single-handedly keeping alive the production of Europa cassette tapes, which is kind of crazy in and of itself. So far so good. So this series was successful in Germany and not in the US. Let's get into the why. So I would say the success or lack of success, so the success versus fail thing, is dependent on 3 main factors for the series. The first factor is the setting. Because I feel to the US American audience, a setting in California just wasn't that interesting. But to Germans, that was exotic, especially at the time the series originally became big here. Because, especially at that time, the idea of, I'm gonna take a vacation to Southern California, that was not a thing people did. Southern California, especially Hollywood, and a lot of the cases had to do there. Jupiter was a kid actor, that's a thing. That was exotic. You didn't go to the US. That was this weird foreign exotic and special, shiny place for a lot of Europeans, especially Germans, imagining like, oh, there's these 3 kids and they get to drive cars way earlier than German kids can, and they solve crimes in Hollywood. Like, that was something so unimaginable to the German audience, especially German kids, that it became automatically very enticing. But it is a lot more normal, I feel like, to US Americans, because yeah, California is just one other state. So it's depending on where you lived, it might literally just be set in your hometown, or in a town that might as well be your hometown. So you're like, yeah, okay, whatever, this isn't that special. US Americans are used to all media being set in the US. It's called US centrism. We have this a lot in media. And I'm gonna get into US centrism a bit later. But basically, having something set in America is not abnormal for US Americans, right? It's completely like, yeah, of course it's set in California, so it's not as interesting of a setting. And there's just kind of more interesting, more thought out contenders for like junior detective stories for US American audiences. But like I said, to Germans this was incredibly exotic and foreign, so it was a lot more exciting, the concept of something set in California. The second thing is the voice actors. The voice actors, I think, play a massive part in why this is so popular here. So, like I said, in the late 70s, Heike-Dine Körting cast these 3 kids to play the 3 investigators. The voice actors are still the same. So they still produce these audio plays every year, and it's still the same voice actors. And mind you, this only works because it is an audio medium, and most people have been familiar with these voices for ages and ages and ages. This would not work if it was any other media. Because if you see 3 men over 50 and they're pretending to be 16 to at most 18-year-olds, you're gonna be like, what the hell? It's like that scene in Brooklyn Nine-Nine where Terry wears a little cardboard sign, a cardboard sign that says, I'm a little girl. It would be so silly, but because it's an audio medium, there's a lot more suspension of disbelief. And also, we are so used to these voices. But like, the concept of the voice actors changing is like, if you bring this up to German 3 Investigators fans, there will be an uproar. There's like, it's not an option to even consider changing the voice actors. And there's this thing where we have to acknowledge that at some point there will be no more audio plays because the actors will simply be too old. There's a thing where a recurring voice actor, Andreas von der Meeden, who voiced 2 characters, Morton and Skinny, he's passed. So these characters have not appeared since, because those are characters that these actors have played for like several decades. So like, you can't just recast. You simply don't go like, yeah, you're Bob Andrews now because Andreas Fröhlich is not doing it anymore. Like, that is not a thing. The voice actors are so intertwined with the characters. So yeah, I think that also, it's weird because kind of the success is so contingent on these voice actors. And I don't think it would work nearly as well with any other voice actors. Which is, in a way, it's sad because it means at some point this series will inevitably end. But also, these voice actors are so good at what they do. So yeah, the voice actors and also the way Heike-Dine Körting produces these Hörspiels are so incredibly synonymous with these characters that it definitely contributes to the success. And the US never had that. They only had the books. So I think it felt a lot more jarring when a writer would switch or the cover artist would change, because they didn't have this through line of no matter what like thing I put on, it's always the same people. So I mentioned the main way people consume the series is as books or as the audio plays, Hörspiel. There are also the live shows, which are like, they're so cool. At some point, like ages and ages ago, the voice actors were like, we're gonna show ourselves. because up to that point nobody knew what these people looked like. Like, they knew vaguely what they looked like as kids, because at some point there was like a photo in the inlay of the cassette, but like people didn't know what these people looked like, and they kind of, I think, in their brain were like, yeah, that's still kids. And then they started doing these live shows, which are really cool. They have a Foley artist on stage that does all of the sound effects live in front of the audience, and they read the script, they play out the script on stage. And it's grown so massively over the years. Like, originally I think very originally they wanted to do this like in a bookshop, and then they looked at ticket sales and were like, oh, yeah, we can't do this, we need to do this in a bigger venue. And I mean, now they fill out fucking arenas with people, and they no longer adapt cases that are already pre-existing. There's like original cases being written just for these audio shows that are usually like picked full with like little Easter eggs for the fandom to enjoy. And I mean, the show I saw, which was The Dark Taipan, which was the most recent one, it was like piggybacking off one of the very original cases, The Mystery of the Singing Snake. And like, after the fucking halftime thing, these voice actors were in a cage floating over the stage. There was like pyrotechnics. Like, the amount of just extravaganza at these live shows is insane. They even made like several Guinness World Records with these live shows. Like, they won, I think, twice. They broke their own record for like biggest audience at a live audio play, like twice. So yeah, these live shows are also, I think, a big thing in keeping the fandom alive. And they're special. They're, special getting to see all of that live. Okay, the third thing is technically not made by the people that write and create these stories, but it's actually the fan base. I think the fan base is incredibly important for the success of the series, because it's the same one. Like, a lot of the people that are now Three Investigators fans started listening to the series in the 70s when they were children. So they fully started listening to this when they were kids, and they just kind of never stopped, or they came back to it when they started having kids. So a lot of the people that are in this fan base have been in the fan base from the beginning. There's this massive amount of loyalty towards the media that you have in this fan base. So the fan base also keeps the story going. And kind of now in our modern age, where we have modern media like TikTok and stuff, it's kind of grown, because younger Three Investigators fans will go on Tumblr and TikTok and they will share skits, or they will talk about like their headcanons, especially queer headcanons. It's great. It's kind of the most cross-generational fandom I've ever experienced. And obviously there's downsides to this. There's a lot of older fans especially that are kind of Puritans, and they get really pissed if you dare to bring up queer headcanons, even though several of the writers and the voice actors support like the queer headcanons. But yeah, like, this medium and the fandom for this medium has just grown and grown and grown. And a lot of it is so across generational. Like, I went to a live show in 2022, 23? 22, I think. Time is a weird soup, but I went there and I saw like people who could be my dad's age, give or take. There were people like my age, like in their 20s. There were people who were there with their little kiddos that couldn't be older than 6. Like, you have all the ages, and all of us are there for the same reason. And like, there's this whole thing where people will like, I've seen this before, like adults being excited when their kids reach an age where they're like, yes, I can listen to Three Investigators with my kid now. Like, this cross-generationalism of the audience is also a massive thing in why this media and this series is so successful. So yeah, I think these three main factors kind of intersect into why and how this series was so successful and has remained successful in Germany. Those circumstances are not given for the US. And then on the flip side, when we're talking about adaptations, we have the live shows, and then there's obviously movies, because whenever there's something successful, at some point people are going to make movies. And there's kind of two bits. So there's the original movie duology that was supposed to be a trilogy, and then there's the 2020 movies. I'll talk about the first ones first. So these were in the 2010s, and they were kind of intended to bring a more international audience back in. It was specifically made so that they could kind of pick up the American audience again, except the films only ever came out as a straight-to-DVD release in the US. But it was, like, strange. They got, like, American actors. Like, I know Bob is played by a young Cameron Monaghan, who we now know out of, like, Gotham and Shameless and the Star Wars franchise, but he was in that series. They tried very hard to pick the American audience back up, but it was a German production, and yeah, it was just not a good time. They were not at all successful in the US at all, so the goal to pick the American audience back up just fell flat. The first movie was, like, decently successful in Germany, and then the second one just fell through. I'm gonna pull up the exact quote. I do not want to misquote. So the Lexicon of International Film says, quote, "Both the characterization of the protagonists and the staging itself were loveless and underdeveloped." So this is about the second film, which these two films both adapted like classic cases. The first one is The Secret of Skeleton Island. The second one is Secret of Terror Castle, which is technically the very first Three Investigators book, the very first Robert Arthur one. So yeah, in fact, this was so big of a fail that the third movie that was planned was never made. And then for ages we had the live shows, and we also had like video games. There's like additional media. There's like solve your own case books. There's something called Rocky Beach Crimes, which is where sort of side characters from the series get to solve a case instead of the investigators. There's two graphic novels called Rocky Beach, An Interpretation, and Justus Jonas, Jupiter Jones, An Interpretation, which are sort of imagining a 20 years, 30 years in the future, these people have grown up sort of setting, and it gets a lot darker and grungier. I've not read these, but those exist. So like there's a lot of additional media, and there's also like in-era graphic novels, and there's just so much that doesn't even count into the main series. And that was all the additional media we had for a while. And then in the 2020s, we suddenly get new movies. There's suddenly this announcement that there's going to be a new Three Investigators movie. And this time, they very much learned from their mistake of trying to pick up an audience that doesn't care about the source material, and instead they focused on who does care about the source material. So the production is German in a German language. They don't try to adapt the book. They instead try to capture the vibe of the audio plays. They get young German actors, specifically unknown German actors, and it worked a lot better. In 2023, there was the first one, which is The Three Investigators and the Dragon's Legacy, which is completely original. This case didn't exist as a previous book, so everyone kind of went in without an expectation because nobody knew what that story was supposed to be like, because they didn't know it. And there were these, frankly, almost unknown, except for one, actors. We have Julius Weckauf as Justus Jonas, we have Levi Brandl as Bob, and we have Nevio Wendt as Peter. And that movie did a lot better than the original Three Investigators movies. It won like a German film prize for the most popular, as in most visitors to cinema. Yeah, the German Film Award 2024 for the most popular film in cinema, as in most visited. So not even kids film full on, point blank. And then they got approved for 2 more sequels. The first one came out this January, and then the next one is set to come out next January. And those two do adapt very well-known books. So the second one adapted The Carpathian Dog, which is the third ever audio play, because the audio play order is a bit different from the book order, and it is from the original book series. It's an M.V. Carey book. It is arguably like one of the most beloved books in that whole series. And then the one that's coming out next year is the 100th book, which is technically 3 books. It's a 3-er case, the Island of the Dead. And this is one of my favorites, so I'm really excited. I'm crazy excited for that one. But yeah, so these movies are doing a lot better. And part of the reason, I think actually a massive part of the reason, is that they are adapting the essence of the audio plays, not just of the book. Whereas the original movies, they kind of tried to adapt just the books, which doesn't work because the fan base doesn't care about the books as much as they care about like the whole media cosmos, which includes the audio plays. So why the hell am I telling you all this? Originally, I wanted to make this video just because I think it's so fascinating looking at a book series from the US being like one of the biggest media phenomena in Germany, whereas in the US, like if you ask someone from the US, like, hey, do you know what the Three Investigators are? They go, huh? Like people don't know this. I have a lot of American friends. I asked like every single one of my US American friends. None of them knew this series. They'd never heard of it. And in Germany, it's so well known that like if you say, oh, someone is playing Three Investigators, people will know that that is a synonym for junior detectives, even if they've never read a single Three Investigators book. Kind of, my partner said that the Three Investigators feel like German Nancy Drew. Like in the US, if we go like, oh, you're playing Nancy Drew, people will know what that means, even if they've never consumed Nancy Drew media, apparently. So it's sort of like that. But I want to make this video for more reasons than just, oh my gosh, I think as an anthropologist this is so cool. Because more recently, the daughter of Robert Arthur has taken it upon herself to revive the Three Investigators. You know, the series that I just yapped about for like 15 minutes at least, about like how it's become a massively successful thing in Germany and still is to this day. And is anything from dead? Yeah, she's taken it upon herself to revive this series. And she claims that she is reviving the legacy of the Three Investigators. But really, and I say this without wanting to be mean, because I read through her whole like fucking Substack. So she decided that she was gonna write a new Three Investigators series, and she's planning to write one for like every letter of the alphabet. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. That is a fun way to go about it. But she doesn't care about the legacy of the books or the series. She cares about her dad's legacy, and it's just... Bro, your dad didn't even write more than maybe a fourth of the original series. Like, yeah, he originated it, and the last thing I'll do is say that Robert Arthur didn't do something amazing in starting the Three Investigators, but bro, his legacy is alive and well, just not in the fucking US. My girl. Ugh. Okay. Objectively, there's nothing wrong in her wanting to honor her dad and his creation. The thing that I think is wrong about it is her approach, because she continuously acts like the American series ended after her dad stopped writing, after the passing of her dad, and that is just not true. And the thing is, it's not that she's unaware of the German series, because in order for her to be able to write these books, she had to engage in discourse with the current German publisher, as well as with Random House, who own the copyright for the original series. There's no way this woman is not aware of there being almost 200 books just from German writers. There's no way she doesn't know this, because she and her agent or whoever had to, you know, do all of the copyright settling, because this also affected the German publisher. Like, are we still allowed to write more? Like, this was a massive thing that had to have happened before she could even announce this new series of hers. There's no way she doesn't know. And like, yeah, I'll give it. She's US American. She doesn't have to know how big the fan base is, but also if she was doing... She needed to have done at least an amount of research, either her or her agent or someone. So she has to be, because of this copyright dispute, aware that there's over, like I said, almost 200 books are written by German writers at this point. Nobody writes 200 books over a span from the 70s to now for a series nobody cares about. So if she has even like a modicum of sense, she would understand that this isn't just a small thing. So for her to go and claim that she is reviving the legacy of the three investigators is ignorant as fuck. Her approach to this is also really weird, because on one hand, she is changing like the cultural background of the characters and making like, I think 2 of them people of color, which that is a good thing, mind you. That's a good thing. The thing that's bad is that she then says, let me find the direct quote. On her Substack, she says, I have no intention of subjecting the new Three Investigators novels to an editor who attempts to foist a, quote, sensitivity reader on me, or who talks about lived experience or similar nonsense. I was determined above all else to protect the best boy detectives ever created from any attempt to make them less intelligent, admirable, or masculine than they truly were. So one, she wants to make some of these characters people of color, but she doesn't care about lived experience or a sensitivity reader for those experiences. And she's a white woman. Clarifying here, she's a white woman. So that's one thing. And then 2, sorry, what masculinity? We're talking about 12-year-old kids here. And none of these kids fulfill the like American idea of masculinity either. Like, there's a whole point, and I'm talking about the original Robert Arthur books here, in Pete being a massive scaredy cat, especially when it comes to like supernatural stuff. Bob is a fucking nerd that gets saddled with being the archivist of the group, and Jupiter is a plus-sized former kid actor who talks like he swallowed an encyclopedia. So none of them even adhere to this US American idea of masculinity. So I don't get why she's like, oh, I'm gonna make sure that they're as masculine as they used to be. Like, babe, what are you talking about? And then on the same Substack, I believe actually in the same post, she also says, in the new books, it is also still quite clear that boys and girls are frequently different in important ways. Which, it's 2025, do we even have to talk about how that is an incredibly outdated thing to put in kids' media? You know, read by impressionable kids? Yeah, so, you know, if that is the legacy that she claims continues to thrive in just her books, babes, that's gonna flop. Genuinely. First of all, I don't think this will be successful with the German audiences at all. Like, the German audiences, to us, that's our media. And I'm saying this, like, people will claim the Three Investigators are ours. A lot of people don't even know that it started in the US anymore. I understand that she has an emotional connection to these books. I understand that to her, these books are intertwined with the identity of her late father. And I understand that. But that is not reason to claim that there is, like, no legacy, or that the legacy is on your shoulders. Because, baby girl, let me say this. The legacy of the Three Investigators is not the same as Robert Arthur's legacy. The legacy of the Three Investigators is decades of books, audio plays, movies, video games, comics, live shows that didn't take place in the US. Sorry to break it to you. But the legacy of the Three Investigators is much bigger than the legacy of just Robert Arthur. It baffles me, the, like, entitlement to claim that there is something that needs to be revived when there's so much media that is being produced in Germany. Like I said, like I described how big of a thing this is here. And to claim that this series needs reviving is just ignoring the work of all the German writers and voice actors and directors and actors. And it's this thing I mentioned before, like America-centrism or US-centrism. The US is so used to everything revolving around the US. And this goes so far that in other countries, it is so hard to establish an own media landscape. Because American media, US American media, is forced upon us until it comes out of our ears. All of the movies that are popular are US American. TV shows, US American. Music, US American. It is so hard to establish an original, like, media landscape for a European country. And Hörspiel And something like the Three Investigators, that is hard-earned establishing of part of our own media landscape here in Germany and in the German-speaking sphere. And this is hard work that people like Heike-Dine Körting and the German writers have put into this. It is so ignorant, and it makes me so mad because it completely disregards like years and years of work. You know what? I have the full list of all the people that worked on Three Investigators here. I'm gonna read it out just to show that this is not Robert Arthur's legacy, because this bothers me. So the Three Investigators is not just Robert Arthur's work, and it never has been. It is also M.V. Carey's work. It is William Arden's work, Nick West's work, Mark Brandel's work, Rose Estes, Megan and H. William Steins, G.H. Stones, Peter Loranges, Brigitte Johanna Henkel-Waldhofer, her name is a tongue twister, Andre Miminger, Andre Marx, Ben Neves, Katharina Fischer, Astrid Vollenbruch, Kari Erhoffs, Marco Sonnleiter, Henrik Bruchner, Iva, Leon Menger, Tim Wenderoth, Christoph Dittert, Michael Kühlen und Andreas Ruch, Heike-Dine Körting, Jens Wawrczyk, Andreas Fröhlich, and Oliver Rohrbeck. And also all the people that worked on the new movies as well, whose names I don't have at the ready because I didn't write them down. But all of these people worked on Three Investigators. So the Three Investigators are all of these people's legacy and not just Robert Arthur's. So really, if we want to talk about the legacy of the Three Investigators and the legacy of Robert Arthur, then this is it. The legacy of Robert Arthur is a book series that managed to not only last from the 60s to the 2020s, the 1960s to the 2020s, and still is going strong, but it also managed to do this by crossing half the fucking earth and establishing a massive media landscape in a foreign country. That is Robert Arthur's legacy, and frankly, I think that's a pretty fucking rad legacy. Like, hello, which writer can, like, obviously there are some writers, but like, genuinely, which writer can claim for himself or themselves that their book series is so successful in a foreign country that it's still being continued years and years and years after that original writer's death? Genuinely. So that is the true legacy of the Three Investigators. And it makes me so mad to see this woman talk about this as if the entire world has forgotten about this series. Like, babes, just because it didn't continue in the US doesn't mean it's dead. Just, I don't know. Everything about her approach to this series makes me so mad, and that was kind of what inspired me to make this video. Because to claim that something is dead because you don't see it is ignorant as hell. And also, apart from that, like, I think her approach to reviving this series is incredibly troubling because, babes, if you're gonna write a series and rewrite characters as people of color and then go, oh yeah, but I'm not gonna have a sensitivity reader because that is gonna ruin my writing and it's gonna impede on my writing process, then don't fucking write people of color as a white woman. This is also funny to me because the one thing that was actually very big about the way her dad wrote these books is that he was intentionally bringing up subjects like the way immigrants in California are being treated, and specifically being treated as lesser than. He specifically brought this up in his books, and for books in the 60s, that was nothing. And now she is being, rather than actually doing what her dad did and being informed, you know, in comparison, in Germany, they're putting like content warnings in the beginning of the older books and in the beginning of the older audio plays that go like, hey, this is old media, it contains no longer appropriate and racist language. Please be aware of this. And at the same time, this woman goes and says, I'm not gonna have a sensitivity reader foisted on me. And I feel like that says more about her than it says about the Three Investigators. This woman doesn't care about the legacy of the Three Investigators. I genuinely don't think she does. I think she cares about her dad, and I think she cares about extremely conservative American values. which is ironic because the reason these books were popular, both in the US and especially in Germany, were never traditional American values or whether or not these characters were masculine. What is interesting about this book series is an interesting setting and strong friendship between three kids that do the right thing and that investigate, injustices and crimes in all areas, be that like one of the most recent books that goes into climate change. A lot of books go into stuff like the way younger people are being systematically like exploited, for example, in sports clubs. There's books that go into doping, there's books that go into, people being wrapped up in crime shit that they themselves didn't even commit. Like, these books tackle a lot of heavy topics, and that's what makes this book series special and interesting. So that's it, and my camera battery is low, so I'm gonna end it here. This was a very weird thing, and probably nobody's gonna care about this, but this was fun for me to do. So thank you for sticking around this long if you have. I'm rushing through this outro now because my camera's almost dead. And yeah, consider leaving a like or comment if you've stayed around this far, and I'll see you on my next video, which will probably be costume related again. Okay, bye bye!